John8, and a little while ago I made a part 1 of a Paper Mario tutorial series that was a lot of people seem to like, um, and afterwards I decided to take a little bit of a break and try out a new scripting thing, and all the comments I got on that were, no one cares about your stupid Mario 64 thing, make a Paper Mario tutorial. Okay, no one actually said that, but a lot of people were commenting that they wanted to see more of the Paper Mario tutorial stuff and not a lot of feedback on the Super Mario 64 stuff. So I feel a little bad because the last Paper Mario tutorial I made, it was a whole lot better than the original one I made a long time ago, which was a live stream where I had no idea what I was doing. But the problem with the one I made recently is that although it is pretty good, it feels like it would be a hassle for me to expand upon it. I didn't really program it well in that regard as far as adding on to it later. And also, I noticed that from your comments, a lot of you wanted to learn about a specific part of the Paper Mario style or different parts of the gameplay and whatnot. So I decided, I'm sorry for wasting 40 minutes of your life on that old video, but I'm starting over the Paper Mario tutorial series, and this time it's going to be more of a one piece at a time sort of series. So in this video, this is going to be one of the longer videos of this series, but this is all for setting up for future stuff. So there won't actually be anything like moving or jumping in this tutorial. That's going to be set up next episode. But having all this stuff set up will make the next episodes a lot easier, and it will make adding stuff later just a lot easier and debugging stuff a lot easier if you have any problems and run into them. So with that being said, let's get into it. So the first thing you're going to want to do is create a new project in Unity. I'm just calling it Paper Mario Setup Tutorial. You can choose a location for it and select 3D and hit create. And this is going to take a minute to load. So once we're in the project, we're going to want to create all the folders we're going to need to keep the project organized. So the first thing we need is a folder for animations, a folder for scripts, a folder for our sprites. The other thing you're going to want to import is this collider, and this collider also has a material for it, a material file for it in my project, although you don't really need it because we're not actually going to see the material on the collider. And in the sprites folder, you're going to want to import all of your sprites for your character. I have a bunch for Mario. You won't actually need all of these, but some good ones to have to start off are going to be the ones for the idle, walking / running, and the jump animation. And you want to have that for both when he's facing to the side and when he's facing like upwards, if that makes sense. And you need to do that for all three, so really you're going to have 6 sets of sprites. But I have a bunch of extras, although you don't really need these. And what you're going to want to do once you import all of these sprites is you want to click on the first one and then scroll down to the bottom, shift click the last one so that you select all of them. And then in the inspector, you're going to want to change texture type to sprite, 2D, and UI, and then hit, and actually first up the quality a little bit by going to max size and changing it to a bit higher, and hit apply. this will make the background of the sprites actually transparent. And the next thing we're going to want to do is set up some stuff in our scene so that we can actually get started with moving our character in the next tutorial. So the first thing we're going to do is go to Insert a 3D Object and add in a plane. And we can call this ground. And let's scale it up to maybe 3 by 3. And go to the tag and hit Add Tag. And it's going to bring you to the Tags and Layers menu. And you, underneath tags, you want to click this plus icon, add a new tag named ground, and hit save. And now go back to the ground and change the tag to that ground tag. And we're going to use this ground tag later for a sensor to check if we're touching the ground, and this will be used to check if Mario is grounded so it can tell whether or not he should be able to jump. Obviously, we don't want him to be able to jump in the air. Now, the next thing we're going to want to do is actually create the player. So let's create an empty game object, and we're going to call this player. And for its tag, we're going to change it to the player tag. Unity already has a player tag built in, so we can just use that. Next, we can add a component to this, and we're going to give it a rigid body. And we're going to turn off use gravity, change collision detection to continuous, and go under constraints and freeze rotation on all 3 axes. Now we're going to create an empty child of this player object, and we're going to call this collider. And we're going to give it a mesh collider. And we're going to, for the mesh of this, we're going to go to our collider in our project folder and grab this, it should be called default, and drag it in. And make sure we hit convex on the mesh collider. Now we can actually see the collider in the scene. And let's actually move this player game object up a little bit. So now we can see the collider a little easier. Next, we're going to create yet another empty child of this collider, and let's call this animator. And on this animator object, we're going to add an animator component. And we don't have any animator controller for Mario yet, so let's go ahead and create one. So in the project folder, we're going to hit create and scroll down to animator controller. And I'm just going to name mine Mario, but you can name yours the name of your character. And then we can go to our animator and drag in this controller. And on this animator object, we're also going to add a sprite renderer. And you can just drag in any sprite technically, but I'm just going to add in an idle sprite if I can find it. There it is. So 27 is what is labeled for me. And right now you can see that it doesn't really fit the bounds of the collider. It fits it pretty well on the vertical side of it, but there's way too much extra space on the sides. So what we're going to do is scale the animator object on its X to sort of fit that. So let me try 1.4 or 1.5 and maybe even move it over just a little bit. And that fits it pretty well. And now what we're going to want to do is scale our collider down so that the sprite no longer looks stretched and distorted. So I scaled it up by 1.5 on the animator. So 1 to 1.5 is a 2 to 3 ratio, so we need 2/3 of its current size. So 2/3 of 1 is 0.666, and 3 decimals should be fine. And now it looks back to normal and not distorted. And the collider fits appropriately. So now we have everything we need, except we need to still add some animations before we can start getting into the scripting. So I'm going to go over how to actually make animations. I'm going to make the idle, running, and jump animations, and any future animations I use, I'm not going to show actually making them, because you can refer back to this video on how to make these animations. So first thing we're going to want to do is click on our animator, so it knows that it's talking about the Mario animator controller. And in the animation tab, we're going to want to create a new animation, and let's go into the animations folder, and let's create a new animation. This one is going to be the idle animation, and hit save, and now it's going to create a new animation. So first things first, we want to hit this red button. This is the record button, and this will make sure that it actually changes the keyframes of this animation. So the first frame that we want of the idle animation is the current sprite it is right now. Because the first sprite we want is the one we already have, we're first going to need to change the sprite to something else so that it actually registers the change, and then change it back so that it still has a keyframe, but it's on the correct sprite. But that's only if it starts out on a sprite that you already have displayed. And let's go in intervals of 15 for something as even as an idle animation. And on frame 15, we're going to change this to the next frame of the idle animation, which is this one, and go another 15 to 30, and change it back to 27, first frame of the animation, then go to 45, change it to this one again, second frame of it, and then go to 60, first frame, and then we can go to 75 and change this one to the blinking version of the idle, so that way Mario actually blinks, and then go to 90 and change it back to the original, and that should be good enough for an idle. So if I hit this play button now, you can see he's actually updating in the scene view, and we can actually see what the animation looks like. Right now it's a little bit fast for an idle animation, but we can change the speed of the animation really easily through the animator, so we don't really have to worry about that. As long as it looks correct for the current speed that it's actually in. So once we're done with that, we can hit the play button again to stop playing, and hit the red record button again to turn off recording, so that we're finished with it. And now we can go on and create our next animation. So the next animation would be running. So we're going to click on this thing that says idle right here, and it'll have a pop-up of all your animations, and we're going to hit create new clip, and this is going to create another animation. Let's call this running, and we're going to do a very similar thing. Hit the red record button, and let's change this to the first frame of the running animation. So the first frame would be this frame, 21, and then we can go to frame 15, change it to the second frame, 30, change it to the third frame, 5 to the second frame, and 60 to the first frame again. So now, if I hit play, he's doing a running animation. The running animation is probably the most simple because it just goes back and forth between an idle and moving one of each leg, so it's pretty simple. So once we're done with that, we can, and we know that it looks good, we can stop playing the animation and hit the red record button again to stop recording. And we can create our last animation, which is going to be a jump animation. So jump. And this one, you can choose to, I should just say, you can choose to animate these a little bit differently, depending on how you want to animate it. But for my particular case, there are actually 3 sprites for Mario's jump animation. So we're going to hit record and change the sprite to the first of the jump animation, which I believe is the first couple, yes. And this one has like a little bit of a trail behind him. And then we can go to, I believe it's about 7 frames. And change it to the second frame, and then we can change it to about 7 frames later to the last frame, and hit play, and it does look a little weird and it's not always showing the last frame. But the main thing is the time it takes to transition between the between all 3, and usually for the jump it is pretty even, and we can slow down this animation. So if I were to go through this, he starts out with that little bit of trail. When he gets to the top of his jump, he should stop having that, and then when he starts falling, he'll switch to this frame. That looks pretty good. And I'm going to quickly, off camera, create the animations for all 3 of these, but when he's facing upwards, so these should be called idle up, jump up, and running up, respectively. And I'll be back when I'm done creating those. So now I've gone ahead and created the up versions of each of these 3 animations. And the next thing we're going to do is we're going to create animations for Mario turning. So in the Paper Mario games, when Mario turns from left to right, or from up left to up right, he sort of does this, the paper he's made out of kind of does like a 180 turn, and it sort of helps with the aesthetic of the whole Paper Mario world. So we're going to create that animation. So we're going to create a new animation, and we're going to call this clockwise. And we're going to hit record, and we're going to, instead of changing the sprite renderer sprite, we're going to go to the transform and of the animator object, and we're going to rotate it on the y-axis. So clockwise should turn clockwise, so we're going to rotate positive, or actually we're going to first start at 0, we're going to add a keyframe, and then we're going to go to, let's just go to 15. And we're going to change this to 180. So now if I scroll through the animation, you can see he kind of does that classic Paper Mario turn. And now that that's good, we're going to also create a new clip, and we're going to call this counterclockwise. And this is going to be very similar. We're going to start by making the first frame 0, and then go to 15, and on this one, instead of doing 180, we're going to do negative 180. And this is because depending on whether Mario is facing normally or if he's facing upwards, the way that he actually rotates when he changes from left to right is different. So now that we have both of those animations, we are good to move on to the next part. So one thing I forgot to mention is that we need to go to our animations folder, and you'll see all the animations you've created. And up here in the inspector, you'll see a variable that says loop time, and by default, it's always checked. But we only want that checked for the animations that we want to loop. So idle, idle up, running, and running up should all loop. But the two turning animations, clockwise and counterclockwise, as well as the two jump animations, should not loop. So we need to go to each of these and uncheck loop time. And now you shouldn't get any weird animation problems with the animation looping. So if you were to go into the animator at this point, you would notice that all these animations we've made have been added into the animator. Let's just go ahead and get rid of all of these except for idle. For now, we'll work more with the animator and actually setting up the animations in the next tutorial. But for now, let's go ahead and start setting up the scripts we're going to need for this project. So the first thing we're going to need is a script to check if Mario is grounded. So let's right click and hit create C# script, and let's call this ground check and wait for it to compile. Once that's done loading, you can go ahead and double click that to open it up in Visual Studio. So once the ground check script opens up, let's go ahead and create all the variables we're going to need. So the first thing we're going to need is a public transform called player. We're going to need a public transform collider, a public vector3 box size, a raycast hit, let's just call this hit, a public float distance, and a public layer mask mask. And we don't need the start function. And on update, we're going to say if physics.boxcast, and then in the parentheses, we're going to say transform.position, box size, negative player.up, out hit, and then quaternion.Euler, and in here we're going to say collider.Euler angles, and then we're going to say distance, mask, and QWERTY trigger interaction.ignore. And then after this, we're going to put our brackets. So that was a lot to take in, but basically this is doing a box cast from the player's position downwards, and it's going to check underneath the player to see if there's ground. And if it hits everything, if it hits anything, it will run whatever is inside these brackets. So we're going to say if hit.collider.tag is equal to ground, and you're going to want to spell this the same as the ground tag from earlier, then we're going to say is grounded, or actually that's my bad. I also need to, up here in the variables, I need to say public bool is grounded. And then in this brackets, we're going to say is grounded is set to true. And then on this, after these brackets, we're going to say else is grounded is set to false. And we're going to copy paste this. The else is grounded is set to false. We're going to copy that, and after the if statement, we're going to paste it. And then we can hit Control S to hit save. And this is all we need for now. We're going to set this up on the actual player in the next tutorial for getting the player moving and jumping. But once that we're done with that, we can return to the Unity editor. So now we can begin creating something that's called a state machine. And this allows us to only be in one state at a time and only run the specific behavior of that specific state instead of checking for everything at once through one script. So what we're going to first need to do is create a new folder, and I'm going to call this Mario State Machine, but you can call it the name of your character, State Machine. And in here we're going to create a couple of scripts. It's going to be Mario State Machine. Yes, I was correct on that one. We're also going to create a script called Mario State Factory. We're also going to create another C# script called Mario Base State. And last but not least, we're going to create a script called Mario Example State. Now, I'm going to say ahead of time that if you're new to scripting especially, then everything I'm about to do in all of these scripts is going to be very complicated, and even if you are experienced, it's still very complicated to explain. I was able to sort of understand it when I looked through the tutorial that explained this to me, but this is based off of code by iHeartGameDev on YouTube. You can check them out. I'll have a link in the top right corner as well as in the description. You can go ahead and check out their design of this. It's super, it's really good, to say the least, but it's also very complicated. So I'm just going to go through, and you can copy what I write for the code, and you don't necessarily have to understand it, because it is rather complicated, but it will make our lives so much easier in the future. So the first thing we're going to do is let's open up our Mario Base State. So once we're in here, we can go ahead and get rid of the update and start methods, and we can also get rid of the things at the top, the using namespaces, and we can also get rid of mono behavior. And we're going to change this to, say, public abstract class. And within it, we're going to create a protected it's called Mario State Machine CTX, a protected player, oh my gosh, I'm sorry, I'm copying off of another screen of what I've already done. It's like sort of my notes to make sure I'm doing the right thing, but the name is different for this because I had player on the other one and Mario on this one. These script names are going to be whatever name you put for the scripts we just made. So this will be Mario State Factory, and we can call this factory, and a protected string state name. And underneath this, we're going to say public string, and we're going to say state name again, but we're going to spell it with a capital S this time. And we're going to afterwards we're going to give it brackets, and we're going to say get, and then brackets, return state name with lowercase, semicolon, and then below this we're going to say set, and then in brackets, state name with lowercase is set to value, semicolon. And then underneath this this bigger bracket, we're going to say public player, or I'm sorry, Mario base state, and we're going to have parentheses, and we're going to say Mario state machine current context, a Mario state factory, and string current name, or current state name. And then we're going to do our brackets, and in here we're going to say CTX is set to current context, factory is set to Mario state factory, and state name is set to current state name. And then below this, we're going to implement any methods that we want all states that Mario can be in to have. So we can have things for like if he presses different buttons. So for the sake of this, I'm going to add the basic ones, but you can add more functions if you like. So we're going to say public abstract void enter state, and then we're going to put parentheses and then semicolon. The syntax is a bit weird for a method, but it'll make sense if you watch iHeartGameDev's video. Public abstract void update state, parentheses, and then semicolon, public abstract void exit state, and a public abstract void check switch states. And then below this we can add any button functions that we want. So I'm going to add the A button, B button, X button, Y button, and Z button, but you can also add things like the start button and anything else you would have on a controller that you want to add. So public abstract void A press function, public abstract void B press function, public abstract void X press function, public abstract void Y press function, and public abstract void Z press function. And then below this, we're going to create one more method, and this one's going to be different. This is just going to be public void switch state, and then parentheses, and we're going to put Mario base state called new state, and then brackets, and then we can say exit state, and then parentheses, and then semicolon, and then new state dot enter state and ctx dot current, or actually, we're gonna have to come back to add that last sentence a little bit later. But that's all for the Mario base state for now. So now we can move on to the next script. So now we're gonna set up our Mario state machine script. So we don't really have to change anything like we did for the Mario base state. But we can get rid of the update and start methods. And we're gonna declare our variables. We're gonna say public Mario base state. And we're gonna call this current state. We're gonna say public Mario state factory called states, and a public animator anim. And then below this we're going to say, you can just type awake and it'll already give you the function for it. This will be called when the script is first loaded, so when like the game starts. And in here we're going to say states is set equal to new player, it's set to new Mario state factory this, and that's going to give us an error because we haven't really set up the Mario state factory yet, but that'll get fixed as soon as we set it up. So now we can move on to the Mario state factory. So if we go ahead and open that up, this one's going to be really simple. We're going to get rid of all of this, the update and start methods. We can also get rid of mono behavior and everything else above it. And in here we're going to say Mario state machine context, and we're going to say public Mario state factory, and then we're going to pass in Mario state machine current context. And we're going to say context is set to current context. And then save, and now the error from the state machine is gone because we added a constructor in the state factory. So now we can go back to our Mario base state, and back down here we're going to say we're going to say ctx dot current state is set to new state, and save that. And now, last but not least, we're going to set up the Mario example state. This example state you technically don't have to set up, but it's sort of a copy paste for every single state that we're going to create in the future, like idle, walking, running. So it's good to have a base for it so you can just copy paste and not have to type in all of the text every single time. So we can go ahead and open this up, and in here we're going to change mono behavior to Mario base state, and that's immediately going to give us a bunch of errors, but don't worry about that, we'll fix those. We can get rid of update and start, and this will be a little complicated, so we're going to say public Mario example state, and and then we're going to put parentheses, and we're going to say Mario State Machine current context Mario State Factory Mario State Factory and string current state name. And then this is where it gets a little complicated. After the parentheses, we're going to hit enter and go down here and put colon, and then we're going to say base, and then in parentheses current context player state factory, or I'm sorry, Mario State Factory, and current state name. And then we're going to put our brackets. And now there's still a bunch of errors, but those are just because we need to add the functions that we added in for our Mario base state. So we have enter, update, exit, check switch states, A press, B press, X press, Y press, and Z press. So we can actually go ahead and go to our Mario base state and copy all of this and go to the example state and paste it. And then we need to go ahead and change each of these to, instead of saying abstract, we're going to say override. So give me a second to do that. And now that we've done that, we also need to, after each of the sets of parentheses, we need to add brackets. And we need to get rid of the semicolon and add brackets. And once we do that, we have officially set up everything that we need. So in future, if we ever want to create a new state for Mario, this is just as a guide for future use. If we wanted to create like a new state, for example, let's create an idle state for it. First, what we do is create a C# script, and we can name it Mario idle state. And then we can open it up in Visual Studio. And in here, we can get rid of everything. And then we can go to our example state that we created and copy all of this into here. And I just realized it overrode the previous copy we did. So now we need to go back in here and copy the idle state name. Then we can go back into here, into the Mario idle state, and it's giving some errors. And that's because we need to change these two things that say Mario example state, change them to the new state name. So this will be Mario idle state and Mario idle state. And boom, we have now created a new state. Now currently it doesn't do anything, but from here we could add any code that we want. So now we're just going to add the appropriate scripts now that we've created them to some of the objects in our scene. So on the player object, we're going to add our ground check script. And we're going to, for the player, we're going to drag in the transform of the player. The collider, we're going to drag in the collider game object. The box size, we're going to set this to be a little bit bigger than a standard 1x1 on the X and the Y, but the Z is going to be thin. So this is going to be 0.6, 0.5, and 0.1. And you may need to adjust these values depending on how big your character is, but for this particular size this should work just fine. and then the distance can be 0.55. The mask, we need it to be everything except for a player layer, but right now we don't actually have a player layer. So we're going to go to our player, and we're going to go to the layer, and we're going to hit add layer, and we can use user layer 3 because it's not set to anything. We can type in player, and now we can go to our player and change it to that layer. It's going to ask if we want to change the children to that layer as well, and we're going to hit yes. And now we can go to our mask and change it to everything, and then deselect the player. Next, what we can do is just drag on our Mario State Machine script, and then we can drag in our animator object for the animator. That should be everything that we need to get set up for next time, which will be adding running, jumping, and some basic movement, as well as the animations for it. So be tuned for that. So now we've set up everything we need to get started with getting our characters moving and adding all sorts of Paper Mario-y stuff to our project in future tutorials. So last but not least, something very important to do whenever you're doing game development is to save often. So go to File, hit Save, and then also File and Save Project. Especially the Save Project, because Save will save whatever scene you're working on, and Save Project will save the entirety of the project. So that's about it for the first tutorial in this series. Again, I know this is technically like the third, but this one will hopefully be a lot better, and I know it was maybe a little difficult to follow along, but good job for anyone getting this far, and thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next tutorial. See ya!